Today, the four of us are going to be talking about the exacerbated education crisis due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Since we are all from different countries, each one of us will be presenting a distinct perspective on education in our respective countries.
We'll end with a general solution that takes into account all of our perspectives.
To start off, I'm going to talk about Colombia and the exacerbated education crisis due to COVID-19 through a lens of geography. But before that, some context with relation to the FARC is needed. Colombia had a history of armed conflict with the FARC, which stands for Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. Fortunately, the President Juan Manuel Santos signed a peace treaty with the FARC, resolving the conflict. This, however, doesn't conceal the many terrorist activities the FARC were known for. Because this guerrilla was situated in rural areas, many rural communities were affected. Children's education especially was severely impacted during this conflict. Children were either abducted or harshly forced to join the FARC, making it unrealistic for them to continue their education. There were shootings among the FARC and the military on academic premises, suspending teaching and shifting the focus to protecting the lives of both students and faculty. In fact, this encouraged some schools to implement courses for security in case of an attack, stripping time from other subjects. The FARC's negative influence on education has been massive, and that's why when the peace treaty was signed, students' education availability improved. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, the education situation has once again exacerbated in rural areas. A lack of academic resources and availability of Wi-Fi have made online learning tough in these areas. In contrast to the FARC, COVID-19 has had a wider negative influence on urban areas. While students have the resources to have online learning, many are unable to learn in this kind of setting. Of course, it's still relevant to highlight the large educational disparity between urban and rural areas, even during COVID.
Faced by the health contingency, measures were taken by the Mexican government in order to reinvent the educational models of the country. The one that was chosen was the Aprende desde casa, which means learn at home, an online method. Referring to private schools who normally have access to internet, great facilities, staff, technology did well while adapting to an online method. But talking about public schools, they implemented an education system where they learned by TV or radio, which does not guarantee that they are actually acquiring the necessary knowledge. The challenge here is how education in Mexico is actually declining when children do not pay enough attention or are not actually understanding what they are learning. And parents need to go to work and they cannot adapt and afford to work at home, or they simply do not have the enough knowledge to be able to explain their kids. Plus, they are having problems to get and pay electronic devices, internet access, electricity. So it is not from both parts, either from the professor or the students. They cannot take advantage of an online classes when they are in public schools.
The education system of the Rainbow Nation, South Africa, is characterized by crumbling infrastructure, overcrowded classrooms, high dropout numbers, and low matriculation rates. These crises have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, which continues to perpetuate inequality and, as a result, failing too many of its children, with the hardest hit being the poor. South Africa has one of the most unequal school systems in the world that has deep roots in the legacy of apartheid that our country is still trying to recover from.
COVID-19 has further highlighted the racial educational disparity in America, and in order to address our problem, we need to look at its history. Since the dawn of slavery in America, African Americans have been denied an education. Once slavery ended and segregation began, separate but equal education was not deemed only acceptable, but necessary. Once the monumental case of Brown versus the Board of Education was passed, it ended the separate but equal rhetoric, but did not actually come up with an adequate solution for this issue. During the Great Migration after Brown versus the Board of Education, many African Americans moved to inner cities, and this caused many white Americans to move to the suburbs, and in turn, they took the funding for education with them. This means that from class lists to extracurriculars, most of the African American inner city school districts were not funded well and still aren't funded well. COVID-19 has really shed a light on this issue with the issue of online schooling. Because the inner city school districts did not have enough funding, they could not afford computers, and therefore many of the children could not learn online. However, with their white counterparts, many of the white children in the suburbs previously had computers or were able to afford computers and therefore were able to continue learning. This pandemic has really shown how African American children's rights to learn are being stripped away from them. In our new post-pandemic normal, COVID will have reached manageable levels where people can meet face-to-face around the world and children are allowed to go to school. We feel students who go to private institutions will recover much quicker than students who go to public institutions. Therefore, even though it's safe, the education gap will be nonetheless present.
For that reason, we came up with a solution that addresses all the different educational disparities in our respective countries. The solution is an outreach program in which mostly students and some teachers from better education backgrounds can volunteer to teach students from less fortunate backgrounds.
To incentivize students, they could gain social service hours. Additionally, the benefits of tutoring are reciprocal, meaning that both the tutor and the students benefit. While students expand their knowledge, the tutor recalls the knowledge they possibly forgot while preparing the teaching material.
We've also taken into account how the solution might be different for each of our countries. That's what we're gonna talk about next.
This school outreach program would not only lower racial disparity in the American education system, it would also foster a sense of community and togetherness where there previously was none. This issue is a very out of sight, out of mind issue for many white Americans, and therefore this program would bring this issue to the forefront of their minds. By having students and teachers from more affluent school districts come and tutor inner city African American kids and also provide them support, it allows them to foster a sense of community and connect with each other on a level they had previously not been able to. Now, both sides are learning, and not just about education, but about each other. This new sense of community will go above and beyond in the help for education funding, especially for inner city children. Since this issue will no longer be out of mind, people will be consciously thinking and consciously choosing to help each other. Our solution allows these two communities to interact in a way that brings communities together while also mending the knowledge gap.
In reference to what Gabby concluded with, the knowledge gap refers to disparity in access to information and tools by poorer communities, which doesn't allow them to gain the necessary knowledge to have a prosperous future. During the pandemic, higher earning households could allow their children to engage in online learning along with other resources, while lower earning households were disadvantaged and, for a lot of the time, won long periods of holiday, which in my opinion wasn't too bad because I got to catch up on 6 seasons of Grey's Anatomy. But as we transition to a new normal, this knowledge gap would be larger than ever. The students whose education was minimally disrupted could carry on as if nothing had happened. But we need to narrow the gap between those students and the other students who lost a lot of learning time. Having academic outreaches where students who managed to cope with the content could help the other students understand the work that they may have missed or race through with a teacher in class to try and catch up. This, in turn, will help narrow the gap and allow the student in need to catch up, as well as benefit the tutor who can reinforce their knowledge through helping others. Schools can promote the tutoring of less privileged students by hosting competitions with a prize for the scholar who logs the most hours of teaching, whether it is one-on-one or in groups. And seeing that not all students are capable of doing the teacher's work, it would be very nice to think that educators of more affluent schools could be encouraged through bonuses to help the underprivileged scholars, a gesture that the educators of the underprivileged schools would be very grateful for.
So the school outreach program implemented in Mexico's education will help to improve the knowledge of public school students who have not had the opportunity of getting the same learning process as those of private schools. Here, volunteer students or teachers sign up to provide tutorings, classes, and support for all of those students who suffer some delay in their education due to COVID. The idea here is to spread information, kindness, that sense of help, and provide a better academic future to those kids.
In Colombia, an outreach program is possible, but not in the same way as Daniela's. It's relevant to discuss the fact that students volunteering to go from urban to rural areas to tutor might seem unrealistic. There are factors of safety to take into consideration, transportation, as well as permission. However, the advantages are far more rewarding in any kind of context than the constraints. In terms of safety, a supervisor should always accompany the batch of tutoring students. Additionally, a kind of permission slip can be signed by the parent, giving authorization for this kind of trip. For those students who need more motivation, the private schools can employ more lucrative rewards, like more social service hours in comparison to other activities, or raising the chances to be admitted into academic clubs that are both hard to get into, but help out on college applications. This can even grasp the attention of parents, making it easier for them to authorize their children. Finally, the simple satisfaction of helping out those in need can be used to fuel motivation too.